Good evening, folks, and welcome everyone to our second tasting in the Finger Lakes Wine Alliance Vertical Tasting Series. I'm Jeff Hauk from Lucas Vineyards, and I'll be your moderator this evening. Tonight, we have a great opportunity for you to taste along with the winemakers from our wineries that are represented tonight. The tasting consists of 8 Finger Lakes white wines broken up into 2 flights. After the first flight, we'll take a moment to reset the tasting area for the second flight with our winemakers from the second flight. Thank you to those media members joining us this evening from all over the country, and a special shout out to our folks joining us from the License to Steal National Wine Marketing Conference in Geneva on the Lake, Ohio. We'll be taking questions and comments this evening via Twitter. Our Twitter handle is @FingerLakesFLXWine, and we'll be using the hashtag FLXWineVT. Let's taste some great Finger Lakes white wines tonight, and our Finger Lakes winemakers have already tasted through the first flight. And with no further ado, we're going to start to talk about wine number 1. Fred Frank is with us from Dr. Frank Vinifera Wine Cellars. And Fred's wine this evening is the 2011 Dr. Konstantin Frank Gruner Veltliner. And Fred, would you like to just give us a brief description of how that wine was made this evening?
Sure.
Welcome.
Thank you, and thanks for joining us. This is a 2011 Gruner Veltliner, and we're really excited about this variety in the cool climate of the Finger Lakes. It's the #1 white grown in Austria, and our climate is similar to Austria. It's a variety that is really very popular right now with top sommeliers in some of the celebrity chef restaurants across the country, and they're promoting the Austrian Gruner Veltliner. There's very little of this variety planted domestically, and so our goal was to ramp up and plant sizable acreage of this vineyard so that it would be available wholesale to restaurants and wine shops, and not just a small amount in a winery tasting room. So we hope to eventually have a Gruner Veltliner available to restaurants as a domestic alternative to Austrian Gruner Veltliner. And we're really excited about the quality of the wines. This 2011 is only our 3rd vintage, but we've already earned multiple gold medals in wine competitions across the country, and we've been encouraged by visiting Austrian winemakers who've stopped by and tasted the wines and offered us praise and encouragement. So we're really excited about the future of Gruner Veltliner in the Finger Lakes.
So if you're following along with us, I'm sure Fred would love to have some questions and some feedback on that first wine. And there are, as you said, Fred, only a handful of American wineries that are producing the Gruner. Is name recognition a problem for the winery? And was the grape variety already registered with the federal government, or did you have to lobby? And this question was not mine. It was from one of you media members who sent it along.
Yes, that's an interesting question. In the case of Gruner, it was previously registered. So we did not have to register the name, although, again, this is only our 3rd vintage. And it is a variety that's gaining more interest. Certainly, it's not as well known as Riesling or Chardonnay, but we kind of look to top sommeliers across the country for what they're promoting. And there seems to be a lot of interest now in lesser known varieties where wine consumers are more adventuresome than they were a few years ago, just in a comfort zone with Chardonnay, let's say. Now they're looking at Riesling, looking at other varieties, and Gruner Veltliner is one of those up-and-coming varieties. So we're very encouraged about wine consumers today being more adventuresome and wanting to try something new.
Thanks, Fred. One of the questions that they also had asked about, just in general, How did weather influence the outcome of this wine, positive and negative, as far as you were concerned, Fred?
We talked about this among the panel about the vintage. It was a challenging vintage, but we got very good fruit flavors from the wine. I think it shows how far we've come in the Finger Lakes with good vineyard management, that even in those less than optimum vintages, our talented vineyard managers and winemakers working together as a team can really get the best out of the vintage. So we're very encouraged by the good fruit flavors that we got in 2011, and also we're starting to win quite a few gold medals in some of these early release 2011 wines that are just recently been released but already winning lots of awards. So that's encouraging.
That's very encouraging. So we're getting some positive feedback along Twitter. I just had a question. Someone had asked Fred, how many acres of Gruner do you have planted, Dr. Frank?
We have 10 acres total of Gruner, and I think that's one of the largest plantings, not only in New York, but perhaps the United States. So we're really bullish on this variety, and we feel it has a great future in the cool climate of the Finger Lakes.
Thanks very much, Fred. At this point, we're going to transition on to our second wine of the evening. And if we get any questions that come through for Fred concerning that Gruner, we'll still be able to try and take care of those before the night's over. So we're going to move on to Lindsay Stevens, the winemaker at King Ferry Winery. And Lindsay provided for you folks this evening a 2010 Reserve Chardonnay from Cayuga Lake in the Finger Lakes. And Lindsay, would you like to briefly go over how that wine was made?
Certainly. This wine was an estate-grown vintage that we actually picked from our vineyard, which is just a short distance from the winery. I received extremely ripe, beautiful, fruit-forward clusters out of the vineyard. And when we produce Chardonnay at King Ferry Winery, we go through and process all of the fruit the same way. So all of the Chardonnay that's going into barrels don't get designated as reserve or our main lot of Chardonnay until after the wine's aged. So all of this fruit was treated exactly the same way. It was all barrel fermented. I co-inoculate the wine with malolactic bacteria before it goes into a barrel. So it gets inoculated in a tank, and then it gets pumped directly into barrels right away. And the barrel fermentation is carried out in the barrel room. Then the barrels all get consolidated, and they're all treated within their blocks out of the vineyard, and those lots carry through with the barrel aging. And the wines are aged in French, Hungarian, and American oak. I try and get a nice broad range of ages in those barrels, as well as a growing origin for the oak. And those lots are tasted throughout their aging process. Generally, we pull them out in August. After going through and deciding which barrels have aged the nicest, those get put into the reserve lot, and the remainder go into the main lot. Chardonnay is extremely important at King Ferry Winery, so I do all of those barrel tastings with the owner, and the highest priority I put on those barrels. So.
Very cool. Lindsay, your description of how you made the wine, I think, did a pretty good job answering this. One media member's question was, are most Chardonnays in the Finger Lakes produced in the traditional manner, barrel fermenting with malolactic fermentations? And in the case of your winery, it sounded like, yes, that is the case. And would you like to add anything to that question?
I will add that we make more than just one Chardonnay product. Most wineries in the Finger Lakes only make one or two. We make a stainless steel Chardonnay. We also make 2 barrel-aged Chardonnays, as well as a third that we're rolling out this year called Vintner's Cuvée. It's been made in the past, but many, many years ago, and so we're going to bring that back. So 4 different Chardonnay varieties, that's quite a lot for the Finger Lakes, I'd say.
Another question, Lindsay, that we had gotten, and I'll put you on the spot here. Do you, at King Ferry, is there a typical best bricks and acid levels that you like to harvest your Chardonnay at? Or is that not your parameter for harvesting?
I would say the parameters for harvesting Chardonnay are fruit development, and so that you only can determine that by actually tasting the berries. We do go through and taste the fruit, and we also bring in the fruit to do testing on, but I would say the majority of picking decisions on Chardonnay are based off of fruit flavors. So
Great.
that didn't really answer your question.
Well, I think we got a pretty good answer for it. The number levels, you're not as tied to a number level as you are to other components that are important to you.
Right.
We have some time if we get any other questions in for Lindsay. Another one, Lindsay, I'm just going to throw out to you. Are you using at your winery screw caps, or are you familiar with how widespread their use is in the Finger Lakes?
We do not use screw caps at King Ferry Winery. I would say we lean more towards the traditional closure. However, they are widely used in the Finger Lakes. And I think that based on our growing region and stylistic choices, I think that it lends itself to being more and more widespread. There's a hefty cost associated with purchasing another piece of equipment to do the screw capping on the bottling line. But I would say that people are more and more leaning towards Stelvin caps.
Just to thank you for that answer. I think someone was interested in if you could give the bricks at harvest of that wine.
This is a 2010 Chardonnay, and I took a peek at my records before I came about what we picked this particular batch at, and they ranged from anywhere from 21.5 to 22.5, I would say.
All right, sounds like we have a numbers cruncher out there. So thank you very much for that, and we appreciate the feedback on Twitter for our tasting. Another question that Taster had wondered, I had described you as being from King Ferry Winery, but we've noticed on your label that it says Treleaven. Could you just explain to the folks out there what that means and why you have the different names on the labels?
Very common question. Treleaven is our brand name. We make Treleaven wines at King Ferry Winery. So we label our higher end wines with the Treleaven name to designate higher quality.
Great. Well, that's going to wrap things up for Lindsay, and thank you very much, Lindsay. And our next winemaker that we have on our panel this evening is Steve DeFrancesco, longtime winemaker at Glenora Wine Cellars, our host this evening. And Steve's wine that we're tasting this evening is a 2011 Pinot Blanc. And welcome, Steve. Would you like to give a little feedback on that wine?
Sure. Thanks, Jeff. Thanks, folks, for having us. This is our 2011 Pinot Blanc. It's been bottled since January, but released for maybe 6 weeks or so. 11 was a bit of a challenging year. There was a lot of rain, and this variety, Pinot Blanc, is like Chardonnay. It's or Pinot Noir. It's relatively tight clusters, and picking decisions with this are based on weather and just how they're holding up in the vineyard if there's a lot of pressure from the weather. But we brought it in about 21 bricks, I think, and I forgot to write that one down. I wrote down lots of other stuff. This vineyard was planted in 07, but we've been making Pinot Blanc from vineyard that was planted in the 70s, back when clones weren't so, people didn't know so much about clones. And we were purchasing Pinot Blanc from a grower, and there was a mix-up from the nursery. Everyone thought it was Chardonnay, but the chemistry was always a little bit different. And a friend of ours from Virginia, Miss Lucy Morton, she was up. She's a great ampelographer back when the morphology of the grapevines was how you would try to decide what variety or how the vines were related. And before Berasion, she said, "Those are nice Pinots there." And they're not Pinots; they're white grapes. She said, "Then they're Pinot Blanc." So, and now you can tell the difference between Chardonnay and Pinot Blanc by looking at the leaves if you look closely. And that vineyard is still mostly Pinot Blanc, although the Chardonnay interplanted in that. But we always used the Pinot Blanc as a component in our sparkling wines until about 1995, and then we decided to make it as a varietal on its own and to barrel ferment it, do it in a somewhat Burgundian style, but a very understated with neutral. Mostly French oak barrels historically, but now we're getting into more American oak. But ones that are 3 or 4 years old at least, and older than that. And we're liking the water bent staves because they're more delicate. The flavors that gives are much more nicely integrated, although their intensity isn't all that much, which is what we want in this. And then we leave it in contact with the yeasts with the primary fermentation yeast until January, when we pull it out and stabilize it.
Steve, we had one of the media representatives had asked if you also grow FLWA in order to make an Alsace blend.
Well, I've never worked with FLWA. It might be one that would be neat to work with, but Fred and I were talking earlier, and his grandfather, Dr. Constantine Frank, worked with Gold Seal Vineyards, where I got my start in the wine industry as a lab technician, but many years ago. I'm not as old
Just
as
a couple of
Fred's
years ago,
grandfather,
right?
Anyway, we had Ellie Gote there, and we used to play around with that and make sparkling wines with Ellie Gote. But the Pinot Blanc tends to be 100% Pinot Blanc, and we do enjoy working with different varieties. We're going to plant some Scheurebe this year. We ought to get some Gruner Veltliner in it. I'd like to play around with that too. And we'll see.
We had a question, Steve. Is barrel fermenting Pinot Blanc common in Alsace?
Actually, I don't know that they use very many barrels in Alsace. I have not had an opportunity to go there yet, but my understanding is that they tend to use wooden cooperage, but bigger than barrels. And I remember a story, in fact, probably 20 years ago, about a young man from Alsace who went to California and came back and barrel fermented in new Burgundian barrels and wasn't allowed to use the Appellation Contrôlée because it was out of character. So.
One other question I had for you, Steve. How long did that Pinot Blanc spend in the barrel?
That was in from harvest after pressing and settling, and it fermented in the barrels and stayed till January, so about 4 months.
And one other thing I was going to throw out to you, Steve, is acreage of Pinot Blanc in the Finger Lakes. Do you have any idea,
Yes.
like what's planted?
I think we know most of it because we work with the 2 bigger blocks, and Gene Pierce is the managing partner at Glenora. His partner, Scott Walliver, has vineyards on the east side of Seneca Lake, and he has about 2.4 acres. And then the other grower has about 2.5 acres too. So there's about 10 altogether, or 5 altogether in the Finger Lakes.
Very good. I think with that, we're going to wrap things up with Steve. Thank you very much. Very interesting stuff. Definitely some new information for people, I'm sure. And our next panelist tonight is going to be David Peterson from Swedish Hill Goosewatch Winery. He's actually with Goosewatch Winery tonight. His family owns both of those properties, though. Dave is going to be pouring tonight for you his 2011 Pinot Grigio. Again, we've got all kinds of experience here tonight from Fred, Lindsay, Steve, and Dave. And Dave will just keep it up. He's got all kinds of information. So Dave, you want to give us a little background on that wine?
Sure, thanks Jeff. Pleasure to be here tonight. Pleasure to be tasting with all of you out there. Pinot Gris, Pinot Grigio, obviously synonymous, has been around the Finger Lakes for quite some time. We've been producing it since 1995, so actually probably one of the longer producers of Pinot Gris or Pinot Grigio. And in fact, when we first came out with the wine, it was labeled as Pinot Gris, and we've moved to Pinot Grigio. There was a slight shift in style, at least. The danger, I suppose, in calling it Pinot Grigio is that there's a lot of Pinot Grigio that either, well, it's sort of a love it or hate it thing. Some of the people that love the wine that supposedly tastes like nothing like Pinot Grigio can be, can be a rather disappointing experience for many people, but Pinot Gris can be very delightful as Grigio as well, if it's handled and grown in the proper place. And I think the Finger Lakes is one of the proper places for this grape, whether you want to call it Gris or Grigio. Just a real quick thing about some of the winemaking. It's a very, it's what I'd call a fairly delicate variety, and the fruit you have to be very watchful of it in the vineyard as it's ripening. Certainly in a year like 11, as some of the others have described, it's a tight clustered variety. It is part of the Pinot family, and all of that group can be quite prone to botrytis and other rots. However, I think vineyard management has really improved what we've been able to do with all of the Pinots, really, and certainly Pinot Gris being that. It's direct press, so it's a variety we don't crush. It goes directly to the press. We go for the gentle handling, and if you dump the grapes, and when it hits, if you go through a crusher like most of the other whites go through, the variety can almost disintegrate if it's very ripe. So we try to, it also has phenolics that can be extracted when that happens. It has some more phenolics than some of the other whites. So again, we go for that gentle handling. We also separate more into the hard press fraction than we do with most other white varieties. That's treated separately and usually returned to the fermentation, which it was in 2011, but it's treated separately off the press. These are all, we have 3 vineyards that we utilize for Pinot Gris. 2 of them are on Seneca Lake, one on each side of the lake near the southern end, and then we have our own 5-acre block on Cayuga Lake, and it contains 3 different clones of Pinot Gris. Now, I think clones are an interesting thing, and they can be different, but I think our experience is relatively short so far with some of those. I think it'll take us a lot more years to fully understand those. We do ferment them separately, however.
I think your answer you just gave kind of answered the. I had a gentleman who had asked, he'd never heard of the 2 German clones of Pinot Gris that you grow. What attributes do they give the wine in the what attributes do they give to the wine not found in the 53 clone?
Well, I think, and even, I'm not sure of the origin, the growers aren't sure of the origin in the other 2 vineyards as well as far as the clonal, but I think it'll probably take us another 25 years to fully understand some of these differences. But they're different, but a couple of seasons, 3-4 seasons of comparing them and also comparing them against different vineyards sometimes is the best way to do it. So.
One of our Twitter followers had just asked what temperature you would like to serve these wines at.
Well, I think that question, I think, depends largely on the year and the style of a wine like this. Obviously, there's personal preference involved. We do go for a little bit higher acidity style, and that's partly was in our change from Pinot Gris to Pinot Grigio. So I personally prefer to serve a little bit higher acid versions at a little bit cooler temperatures than I would if it was a lower acid wine. So 50s are going to be what most people probably are going to serve them at anyway, and I think it becomes a personal preference as to where you are in that range. Some of the lower acid ones I tend to like as they move toward the 60s, low 60s perhaps.
Okay. This question I'm going to throw out right from myself. I see your varietal composition, you blend in a little bit of Riesling, Chardonnay, and Vignoles. And what do you feel they bring to the table in that Pinot Grigio?
Well, every year it's a different. There's no recipe winemaking. I don't think with most of the winemakers here, and every year we look at these wines separately. And last year in 2010, it was bottled as 100% Pinot Grigio. So we're looking for bright fruit flavors, a nice round mid palate, and I think one of the things that we noticed in tasting it this year, we liked a lot of the fruit flavors that were there, but it seemed a little light in the mid palate. So I think one of the most interesting or key blend components in this wine this year was the 10% Chardonnay, which was stainless steel fermented, but we used malolactic on that. And I think it kind of rounded out that mid palate, increased the mouthfeel. Certainly in Alsace, sometimes Gewürztraminer is used as a blend component. We used a little bit of Riesling to lift the nose as well.
Another question, Dave. The fruit, was it hand-picked or machine-picked, and what was your choice, your reasoning for that?
The fruit was machine-picked in all 3 vineyards, and that is it's sort of an interesting dilemma sometimes. We do, especially in a year like this where there's sometimes some more sorting required. We ask the growers to sort before we machine pick or before they machine pick. We do the same thing in our own vineyards. And the reason that we prefer, especially in a variety like this, one of the reasons is to get it at cooler temperatures. So we've actually utilized that very early morning, right at daybreak harvest, and get them picked as quickly as we can. It's it's not a late variety in the season, so you can be saddled with a little bit warmer temperatures than you want to sometimes when you're hand picking. And it's fragile fruit. I want to get it to the winery as quickly as you can, and I certainly don't want it warm.
Very good. Well, I think we're just about wrapped up the panel. Thank you, Dave. We had one other question that came in for Steve. And Steve, there was a question about what barrels you used on the Pinot Blanc. What origin of the barrels?
They were mostly French from 07 and 06, and then a few 08 and 09 American barrels. And we were using Saint Martin, Rousseau, Barrel Associates, and those are water bent. We like those American barrels from Barrel Associates. We're kind of liking Appalachian oak from Pennsylvania, West Virginia, Virginia. For our wines, a little bit better than the Ozark oak from Missouri.
Okay. And one other question for this panel before we finish up with you guys. If you could, just starting with Fred, give us the suggested retail price of your wines tonight.
Yes, the Gruner Veltliner is $17.99 a bottle.
Okay, and Lindsay, your Chardonnay?
The 2010 Reserve Chardonnay is also $17.99.
And Steve?
I think it's $13.99.
We won't quote you. And Dave?
We don't use the 99 on this one, so ours is $16.
Okay. Well, on behalf of the Wine Alliance, I want to thank our first panel of winemakers very much. And we're going to take a quick break for us to conclude this flight and get our second flight set up for our winemakers. And then we'll be right back with you. Bearing with us for our changeover here. And we're going to jump into our second flight this evening, which for me I think is a great variety for the Finger Lakes. I'm excited that we have these folks here tonight. And I have some personal favorites that are in this lineup, some great wines. So we're going to bust right into the first wine. The second flight is made by Dave Breeden from Sheldrake Point Winery. It is a 2011 Gewürztraminer. And Dave, would you like to just give us a little feedback on how you made that wine?
Sure. We hand-pick the grapes because we have no machine to pick them with. We bring them down the hill, chill them down for a couple days, crush them and stem them to a tank, and let the juice sit on the skins for 3 days. Bring them back out, press, let the juice settle out, take the juice off and ferment it, generally at cooler temperatures, 60 to 65 Fahrenheit. So it normally takes about a month to ferment, and that's it.
I'm sure we'll get some other. I have a few questions for you, Dave, but I'll just throw in. I'm a neighboring winery of Dave's, and this is his Gewürztraminer is like one of my favorites every year.
Thank you.
I don't know what you folks are smelling, but usually that nose is just intoxicating. So, Dave, we had some folks that had asked about for a dry Gewürz. Your usual harvesting is mid-October, normal harvesting date for you?
Yeah, I don't know that we've ever deviated by more than a week or a week and a half from the middle of October. That just, even given weather extremes, which we surely have here in the Finger Lakes, it doesn't tend to deviate much from that.
How about any new unique methods that you would say for Sheldrake that you're using to make that wine?
I don't know about new in general. As of a couple of years ago, the cold soak technique was new to us at Sheldrake, and I do think it makes a difference in the wine. Some years it's more expressive than others, but I think that cold soak gives it a certain weight. It certainly gives it a more intense flavor, I think, than I would get otherwise. The flavor components for Gewürz are in the skins, so my belief is the more time you spend on the skins, the more flavor you're going to get. I hope that's true.
This was your closure is a cork closure, correct?
Yeah, natural cork.
And also, possibly same person who asked a few moments ago, what would you recommend for folks' ideal serving temperature for this wine?
This is, I would agree with what Dave Peterson was saying. This normally is a fairly low acid wine. It tends to be in the 4 to 5 gram per liter range, so a higher temperature would perhaps be more appropriate. I don't know if I'd go as high as 60, but more 55 to 60. This particular year, the acid was a little higher. It's actually closer to 6.5. So, again, following what he said, maybe closer to 50 than 55 would be appropriate.
Great. And what's the wine retail for, Dave?
18.
Very good. What's your procedure, Dave, for harvesting and placing the, just trying to read exactly what that is. Basically, someone was interested in why you harvest and place your grapes in the refrigerator truck for cooling.
Oh.
And what does it do to the grapes?
It chills them, oddly enough. If you put the grapes in a cold place, it makes them colder. If we had access to a machine harvester, we would, again, I would do what Dave Peterson was talking about in the previous flight. I would send the harvester out there at 4:30 or 5 in the morning when it's still dark out, it's still cold, and we would be able to bring the grapes in cold.
So basically you're using the refrigeration to assure that your grapes are at the temperature you want for your cold soak.
Right. Essentially what I've found is that there's no way to get the grapes cold once you've crushed and destemmed them, so they have to be cold before you crush and destem if you want to do a cold soak.
Very good. I think, Dave, we're going to wrap up your portion. If I get other questions related to your Gewürztraminer, we'll come back to you. And at this point, we're going to go over to our next wine in this flight, and that's going to be Seneca Shore Wine Cellars 2010 Dry Gewürztraminer. We have their winemaker, Sean Verity, with us this evening. And Sean, would you like to give us the rundown on how you made this 2010 Dry Gewürz?
Sure. The grapes were hand harvested. I try to, because I don't have any refrigeration or any of those modern technologies, I try to pick on a cold morning. They are hand harvested as quickly as possible. That generally means as many possible bodies as I can get in the field. Usually early to mid-October, these grapes come in. Again, hand harvested, whole bunch pressed, and I try to keep the pressure on the press a little bit lower to try to keep some of the phenolics from coming out in the juice. So generally about 1.5 bar, I will stop pressing. Fermented coolly, 62, 63, 65. Again, I have a very rudimentary cooling system, so the best I can keep it cool is how I go. It's a quick ferment. I mean, I'm probably done fermenting in 10 to 12 days. I usually let about a week go by before I will rack in sulfur, maybe even 10 days to 2 weeks, depending on how much CO2 is coming off my fermentation. And for me, it's I use very neutral yeasts a lot of times in these varieties to try to keep the vineyard expression to come through. So that's about the quick wrap up of.
Great. Well, hopefully we'll get some questions, kind of, and maybe a little feedback, like, because our first two wines, we definitely had some different styles that they were made in the way that you guys made them. So if we can get a little feedback from the tasters out there as to if they think that expressed itself in the glass. I'm going to put you right on the spot, Sean, with one of our media questions. I think is a pretty tough question as far as Gewürztraminer. It looks like Gewürz is grown surrounding all the lakes. Are there any differences that can be linked to a specific lake or side of the lake? I mean, I kind of said in our, before we started this, I think as winemakers maybe we have a feeling about Riesling concerning this, but I'm going to throw that to you concerning Gewürztraminer.
And I'm going to say yes.
Okay.
And then to elaborate, I'm actually going to use Riesling as my example.
Okay.
And I'll explain that briefly. Because of the widely different techniques we use with Gewürztraminer as far as processing it, it's very hard to hone in on differences within the fruit within the lakes, to where my feeling is that Riesling, at least especially when I was younger in the region, we had a recipe of sorts that we all kind of followed, and that you could see that the differences in the vineyards were coming through in the finished wines because our recipes were the same. So it's very tough to talk about Gewürztraminer in that way because our recipes for making Gewürztraminer are so varied, which we see from wine 1 to wine 2 here. So I am dodging the question a bit, but I am answering it to say that there are very distinct differences within the lakes, within the south end to the north end, the east side to the west side. But it's very hard to articulate with Gewürztraminer.
Very good. I'll try not to give you a real tough question here next year. Could you give me your price also on that?
It's $13.99, $14.
See, I told you I'd give you an easy question. That wasn't so hard. How about, I'll throw another regional question at you, Sean. What makes your growing area so unique to making such quality white wines?
I think it's really the wonderfully cool summers that we have. It's very temperate. We get this wonderful cooling from our lakes during the summer and warming of our lakes during the winter. So not only do they provide us with such beauty and scenic attractiveness, it also serves quite a purpose for us. That the lakes are kind of a lifeblood for our whole region.
Another hot off the press off our Twitter feed. Someone had asked a question, why 4 Gewürz tonight? And I think I could answer part of that in that, like, our winemakers tonight were given their choice basically was non-Riesling white wines. And then at their choice, it was what they felt was their best expression of that from their wineries. So do you guys feel like that probably is why you guys have Gewürz in front of you this evening? It kind of fit are.
And I think it's another varietal in the future that, like Gruner Veltliner, that we have to get over that obstacle from a marketing standpoint. But I think it makes a great wine in this region.
Another thing like that question, and Sean, I'll let you answer first, and then Dave, if you want to throw in anything, and then I'll ask Ann and Barry later. Would you consider yourselves, your winemaking and your house style, old world or new world? Or will you refuse to answer that question?
I would probably have to say it's old world style, mostly because of technology. I would say I'm old world style.
Okay, and I'll go backwards for 1 second, Dave, and how about yourself?
I think it's kind of a combination of both. I try and do as little as possible to the grapes, but some of the modern technology that we have at Sheldrake lets me do that. So there.
Very good. Well, I think we're going to wrap things up, Sean. Great job. Then we're going to move on to our third Gewürztraminer tonight. And we have another Finger Lakes veteran with us, Ann Raffetto from Wagner Vineyards. Ann's been with Wagner's for a long time, and not long as like an old or anything. Just long.
Thanks, Jeff.
And she has with her tonight the 2010 semi-dry Gewürztraminer. And Ann, would you like to give us a little rundown on how you made that wine?
Sure. Well, we have a harvester, so these grapes were machine picked. We're an estate winery, using just all of the fruit that we have control growing. It's definitely a teamwork approach here at Wagner Vineyards, and the decision to pick is not based on numbers, but just by going out to the vineyards and eating the grapes. When I think about Gewürztraminer, we're in there a lot eating grapes, and we're waiting for that spiciness to sort of peak. At any point when we feel that it's diminishing, we'll be picking the next day. With that harvester, the crew can go out at 7 in the morning and we'll have grapes on the press deck at 7:15. So we can get them processed pretty quickly and at the nice cool temperatures. We've got jacketed stainless tanks so we can cool down the juice. And pretty much use a minimalist winemaking technique that we're just trying to preserve the hard work that the vineyard crew put into growing the grapes and getting us the varietal expression. So, neutral yeast, cold fermentation, clean fermentation, clean juice and settled juice. Again, our fermentations are about 63 degrees. Maybe at the end I'll let it warm up to 65 just to finish it off. And 2 weeks the fermentation is done. Something that we maybe do a little different that I haven't heard the other winemakers talk about is that we have the philosophy that if we need to do some manipulation to the wine, that the juice is a bit more resilient. So we have I don't know if it's just our vineyard, but Gewürz is one that tends to give us some protein stability problems. And so we'll do juice fine. And we feel that in parallel trials that we've done since in the early 80s, doing 2 tanks, the same, one juice fine and one not, we felt that we kept more varietal character in, that we lost something by treating the wine. So we've maintained doing this treatment to juice. This is a semi-dry style as opposed to the drier styles that we
And the retail price on that, Ann?
we do the 99 thing, $12.99.
$12.99. One taster had asked if you tasted like a little carbonation in that wine, and I don't know if they were referring to CO2 in the wine or.
Could very well. This one we don't mind going into the bottle with a little CO2 spritz, with the touch of residual sugar and just helping with the acidity to wrap some around it. But that is something that we think works in this one. We also do produce a dry Gewürztraminer like you've had, and for us that's more of a cult wine. It has some loyal followers, and that people put that one in down to age in their cellar, and we get emails about how long, how it's changed, and people are excited it changes. This one is all personality and a fun one to make.
One of the questions that just came in, and I apologize, I was reading it as I was looking at it. Gewurz or Gruner experience, do any of you folks feel that they'll have the Riesling effect in being the next thing for the region? I'll let you take that, Ann, since you're on the spot. Where I think they're just kind of wondering, like, if as winemakers, you feel like it's a solid variety, or if it's something on the edge of having kind of the explosive growth that we've seen with Riesling.
Oh, I think, well, since I'm not out there in the vineyard having to grow it, I think Gewürztraminer are just great in this region. The cool nights just keep all those vibrant flavors in there. Gruner makes delicious wines, and I'd have to say that Fred's is the first one. This is the first time I've tried the Primus wine and some of the other ones, but I think they'll be great in this region, and that people are just so much more curious about wines that they are going for these other varieties that they don't. The consumers are more interested in trying new varieties.
Very good. I wanted to get back to one of our media questions. Had asked about your Scott Henry trellis system and whether or not it's common in the Finger Lakes, and maybe they are in the Virginia area. They had said a few
Right.
Virginia growers were starting to use it.
Right.
And
We made our first Gewürztraminer in 1984. And that same vineyard is now on its third training system. So when we started, it was grown on a high wire cordon, and that going out to test that vineyard was sort of being in the jungle trying to find the grapes from the leaves. I mean, they were hidden. I mean, and you would be up trying, and it wasn't really the best for fruit exposure, which is very important in fruit in flavor development. So once the owner's son started running the vineyards and made some changes, he was trying to increase the fruit exposure and changed over to vertical shoot positioning. And that we were very happy with in the winery, as far as being able to have more uniform fruit and easier testing, and to get more, we tested the vineyards, when we harvested the vineyards, we got very similar numbers. But that was challenging in the vineyard. And so then he researched and decided that this Scott Henry would work out better on their end. And the way it was described is, I mean, basically you're doing balanced pruning. And with vertical shoot positioning, you're leaving so many shoots on a vine. Everything is sort of growing up in a contained space. But there's actually maybe not enough room for the shoots in the vine's allocation in the vineyard. And so by separating, what Scott Henry does is putting half the shoots up and half the shoots down, you're really increasing your canopy area, and so you're just the leaves are just generating so much ripening material and exposure that it eased up in the vineyard, and all the fruit is in this zone that's easy to pick, and we're seeing no real change as far as chemistry in the numbers and how the fruit look between the BSB, but we're seeing that we're getting the fruit in a little earlier.
so it sounds like it's a trellis system that works in some high vigor situations.
I would say moderate vigor, and definitely in our location.
Sounds good. And
I don't know how widespread or what trellising systems.
We're Scott Henry as well, for vigor reasons.
BSB. Yeah, so 2 and 2.
I think probably for vinifera growers, those are probably the two most common trellis systems that are used in our area.
It's a these grapes don't grow themselves. The vineyard groups, they work hard.
Take a lot of work to make these varieties.
Yeah.
Sean, we had one more question. Apparently, someone didn't catch your price on your wine.
$14.
$14. That's not $13.99, folks. That's $14. And we're going to. Ann will still be here if we get some more questions coming in, and we're going to ask this panel to stay a few minutes after we finish up with Barry in case we get some late tweets coming in. But we're going to move over to our last wine of the evening. Again, we have another Gewürztraminer from Rooster Hill Vineyards. They've been making some great wines, and we have their winemaker here this evening, Barry Tortolone. We have a 2010 estate-grown Gewürztraminer, and Barry, welcome tonight. Would you like to give us a little rundown on your wine?
Well, thanks. For to choose the wine for tonight's flight, we wanted to go something aromatic white, obviously, and something that was estate grown. And
Quick off the press price?
$16.99.
Okay.
And as far as the winemaking goes, we don't have a picker, but the neighbor has one from the farmer that helped the Hoffmans get established. He has since passed, and Mennonite has taken over the farm and kept the grapes. Sometimes they're not too keen on keeping the grapes, but our neighbor's pretty bent on keeping things in the way they were and even planting some new varieties. So sometime you can come to our vineyard and see the grape picker with steel wheels on it. So welcome to Yates County. And like my peers, I like to have my fruit cool. So either we'll pick, usually try to pick on a cool morning. I love the way Gewürz machine picks. It looks like you have a bin full of marbles. There's very little stems. They juice up pretty well, so that's my economy skin contact time. And then I leave them for probably 6 to 8 hours, and then we press out. And then I cold settle for 2 days before inoculation. I'd like to give Ann my little twist on protein stability. Gewürz and Sauvignon Blanc seem to be problem children in this area, and like my days in school, I'm a kind of kid that runs with scissors, and I don't control my fermentation temperature. I do use a yeast that's not very aggressive. I use Epernay 2, and I don't control the temperature. And I think what that buys me, you can see the aromatics and the mouthfeel are really nice, but my protein stability problems are nil. I've heard people having to add 4 to 8 or 9 pounds of bentonite to get stability, so if it gets in a warm car in the afternoon and isn't throwing a haze, I'm getting by with usually 1.5 or less. And those of you that know about wine treatments, less is better, and I use that to kind of retain the integrity of the wine at hand. So.
Great. One of the media had asked what you felt like adding a little bit of Riesling to the wine did to the wine.
I think it fills out the mid palate and lengthens out the finish. I'm all about mouthfeel, and what I try to do with my first initial sip, when it hits you in your mouth and kind of, not for a better word, explodes. I want you to have a kind of intense experience and just have all the fruit express itself through the variety and yeast choices.
So your choice of the Epernay 2 yeast, is it also flavor, or was it just a selection based on controlling like the stability?
I don't know how much that would add to the stability, but despite all its downfalls, and what I'm looking for is a wine with a little hint of RS, usually 1.4 to upwards of 2, depending on the acidity and pH. I picked that because it usually generates a nice mouthfeel, and it doesn't go crazy like some other yeast strains where it really doesn't have the killer factor like the K116 or some other ones that you can get your business done in a week or less. So.
Where are you distributed, Barry?
Through Opeechee, through New York State, and then there was somebody I think carrying us down in the city.
Okay. We had just had a question come in, and I probably will shoot it down the line in a moment, but I'll start with you, Barry. What do you want consumers to know about your wine and the Finger Lakes in general?
Well, I want them to understand that we're just a lot more than we have been in quite a number of years, and that aromatic whites are going to be the wave of the future here if they haven't already started. And then to answer some of your question about Gewurz as a variety, I think it's, I don't know if it'll be as big as Riesling, but I think from a wine quality standpoint, it could be as successful as a white, aromatic white for the region. So.
I think I would have to agree with you. And what would you like the consumers to know about your wine this evening and the Finger Lakes in general?
I think that we're producing some wines that are really food friendly. The slightly or cooler climate, we have slightly lower alcohol levels, and that really makes a difference in how these wines go with food and how you feel the next day. So I think they're exciting wines being produced in this area.
Thank you. Makes me want to go out and drink some more. No. Sean, how about yourself? Same question. What would you like customers and consumers to know about your wine in the Finger Lakes?
Mostly about the Finger Lakes. I grew up here. We're very genuine, hardworking people who are just putting out a product that we'd like you to enjoy. So it's a very basic answer to your question.
I think it's a perfect one. Dave Breeden, how about you?
Just to say that I'm really excited about the quality of wines in the Finger Lakes. The change, really, even over the last 10 or 15 years, is just tremendous. You can get aromatic white wines from the Finger Lakes that are as good as those from anywhere in the world, and you can get them generally at a considerably lower price. So, buy Finger Lakes.
So with that, I think we're going to wrap up our tasting, and I'd like to thank our panelists for coming in. If you could stay for a couple of moments, I'm going to see if we get any more tweets come in to ask you guys any questions. And I think we had 2 great flights of wine tonight, and I hope you folks who are out there enjoyed them. And I know these winemakers would love to get some feedback, so if you enjoyed the wines, make sure you let them know. And thank you to all the media members and other folks who were following us this evening. And we look forward to tasting with you again. Thank you very much. And again, we'll wrap this up with any final questions. Tweet those in to us, and we'll... one question we just had gotten, how many AVAs do we have in the Finger Lakes? And the one thing I will just say that as members, I'm representing the Finger Lakes Wine Alliance. And the reason it's called the Finger Lakes Wine Alliance is that we've gone to a more broad designation. But do one of you guys want to take that further into how many AVAs we have in the Finger Lakes? 1, right?
I mean, I would guess there's 4, right? There's 1 for each lake and then 1 for the region in general. And at Sheldrake, we espouse the same philosophy that you just said. It's not about Cayuga Lake, even though we're on Cayuga Lake. It's about being in the Finger Lakes. It's about a broader market perspective.
I think the group of us have kind of decided to market ourselves more as the Finger Lakes. Did anybody else want to add anything to that? We're just checking to see if we have anything else coming in on Twitter. Any of you guys want to take a shot at this one? How many Finger Lakes wineries produce Gewurz?
A lot. I was amazed.
Man, it's got to
No,
be.
I mean, seriously,
It's got to be more than 20, right?
Yeah, no, I mean there's something like 100 wineries in the Finger Lakes, and I would bet that upwards of 40.
Yeah,
I mean,
that's a good point.
once last year and once this year, I've gone around tasting just Gewürztraminers, and I thought, oh, that'll be easy. I could do 5 on each lake, and it ain't that way. There are a large number of Gewürztraminers.
So if you come to the region, they're pretty readily available.
Yes.
Yes.
So I think we're going to call that a wrap, and thank you very much.